Hello everyone and welcome back to the Cannon Talks YouTube channel. I'm Yash Mahatma and this is the first ever tactical analysis video on the Cannon Talks YouTube channel. So let's get straight into it. This video is about Manchester City versus Arsenal from yesterday's game. The 3-0 defeat to Manchester City in a game where we had less than 30% possession, no shots on target. It was an incredibly underwhelming performance. Some might say boring for Arsenal fans, some might say boring to City fans too, as although they did create opportunities and there were a few chances in the game, there wasn't as many or as consistent as we've seen in the past between these two teams. So let's start from kickoff. Arsenal were the much more aggressive side, much more sharper. We were pressing well as a unit. We were creating opportunities too early on in the game. And then the game started to flip once we lost Granit Xhaka through to injury. Now the reason I say it started to flip is because Granit Xhaka is one of the leading figures in the midfield. He's the one who's commanding the midfield and trying to keep the strikers and the defenders in order as we stay as a compact unit. Once Ceballos did come on, it seemed we lost that sense of leadership because Ceballos is more of the type of player who sits back. So far for Arsenal, has built up from the defenders and tried to connect with the attackers, whereas Granit Xhaka is trying to construct the players around him and make sure they're in the right positions for him to get his head up, pass the ball, destroy City's attacks. So there were two different types of players in that game, and you can tell by the lineup that Arteta did put out, with the likes of Eddie Nketiah starting, with the likes of Bukayo Saka starting. He was looking for very specific roles from each and every one of his players. He had a game plan, and at the start it was working. Both teams tried to press each other. City definitely pressed a lot higher. They used a much higher line. Their defenders were sitting on the halfway line. They pressed with a front three and they were targeting our goalkeeper and our two centre-backs. The way they pressed was, once the winger had an eye on his centre-back, if the centre-back looked like he was going to pass to the full-back, their wingers started to move towards that run. The other thing their wingers had to do was try and stop the balls inside. So the way they played was, if we have two centre-backs here that are Arsenal, we have three attackers here. These two centre-mids at the time would have been Ceballos and Guendouzi. They were blocked by the two wingers, those two passing lanes. So they couldn't get that ball to this side. The other thing that then happened was, when the ball went to the Arsenal fullback, the winger would start to close down the fullback whilst trying to stop the passing lane into the Arsenal midfielder between the fullback, and then their midfielder would push up and try and close down that space, and that's how they constantly were keeping us under pressure, and we weren't able to build from the back as we would have wanted to. But there was a passing pattern involved in Arsenal's play that did come off a couple times. The idea was to play it to the centre-backs, into the midfield, back to the centre-backs, closer to the closest full-back, then move the ball across the field to the other side, because that's where the space was. By drawing in all those City players onto one side of the pitch and to create a quick switch, you could then attack that space, and Arsenal did that a couple times in the game. But we saw a lack of confidence in some of the balls we were playing. Pierre-Emerick Aubameyang got into some really good spots and made very good attacking runs, constantly in between the full-back and the centre-back in that channel, waiting for a ball down the left. But the ball never came. There was one point in the game where Aubameyang was increasingly frustrated with Tierney when he was clean through one-on-one with the keeper had Tierney have played the ball into him. Now City were doing something slightly different. The way City were playing, they had players a lot more closer to the ball, rather than widespread when it came to building from the back. The idea is if you have players closer to the ball, you can make quick interchange in passes. There's other things that were going on with City's play last night too, and there's been a feature throughout the season for them. What City were doing was, they've used a 2-3-5 formation in which the 2 is the two centre-backs, the 3 is made up of two full-backs that are in line with the centre defensive midfielder, which was Gundogan in this case, and then the 5 attackers, which was a striker, the 2 attacking midfielders and the wingers. When you have your 2 centre-backs and your 3 the line of 3 ahead of them, the idea is to not only use these players as passing options, but to actually distract Arsenal players, because the way we were then marking was that instead of having to mark 2 midfielders in behind like City did, Arsenal had to mark 3 midfielders in behind. So that extra midfielder could be used in a clever way to put him in a particular position that it actually distracts the man that Arsenal is trying to press and draw him out, creating a passing lane for another player. And City consistently did that, and they were able to move up the pitch. The other thing that was going on is, because the players are so close together, Guardiola has drilled his players into anticipating when they're going to lose the ball. They need to be in the right position. By having your players rather than this far apart, but this far apart, the ball does get turned over in that situation, they're a lot closer to try and stop any counter-attacks that would occur. And that's exactly the case that happened a lot down the flanks when Kyle Walker was much more tucked in, ready to try and stop Aubameyang's countering runs in the second half, which there were very few of. Aubameyang had very few touches in that game, and it's because those passing options were closed down immediately by City in an effective way. In terms of how both teams were on the ball and off the ball, City were definitely stronger. Arsenal were very lackluster. It seemed there was no confidence in the team to play any balls in between the lines, and we couldn't progress with the ball either. Manchester City had us locked to our own box, both in attack and in defence. Whenever we attacked City, City would be able to push our centre-backs either at our own box or at the halfway line. However, when it was the other way round, we allowed City to come onto us. What was going on was there was a man marking system in the midfield. Joe Willock was marking one player, Guendouzi marking another, and Ceballos was marking the last midfielder. Now that's great when you're trying to press them, but at the same time they can move around the pitch so much that they pull you out of position, and that's when they're able to push onto you. Once they do make that yard gainage of around 30 to 40 yards, then they pin you in. And what was consistently happening was we was going over to press them, and we left a big gap. There wasn't that much support from our defenders, not a high line, and City kept on getting in behind and they drew further up the pitch. Once they did, all three of our midfielders sat right back, and the entire team was kept within a 15-yard block that City were then having to try and pass through. Now, initially this would have been a very good idea because you minimise the space that City's midfielders get to play in. The likes of Kevin De Bruyne and David Silva too. And one of the tactics we did use might have been inspired by Johan Cruyff back in the 70s, because there's a part of the press where you try and close down all the passing options by using 3 to 4 players all onto one person. So by having these 4 players here on this City midfielder, you pass off as many close passing options as you can, but you do leave the space either side. And those chances that Kevin De Bruyne did create, where he played the ball either side by drawing in all those Arsenal players, really cost us, and it really meant that the team was consistently out of breath chasing the ball rather than having it and relaxing. The other thing City did very well that really exploited us was when we were in those positions where we were close, bunched up together, and we did have both wingers tracking back alongside the fullbacks. And so if I'm the Arsenal goal, our defenders are here, our wing backs are either side, but there's such a big gap between the wing backs and what's going on in the centre of play that this ball in between this group of players and the Arsenal winger was constantly exploited, and Raheem Sterling and Riyad Mahrez were constantly getting joy through that way, not to mention the amount of times Kevin De Bruyne will have thought about making those underlapping runs as he's done before to provide the cutbacks. And that was a consistent feature of City's play, was providing cutbacks back into the box for their players to finish. So tactically it was a very interesting game. It was going to be very interesting to see how Pep Guardiola was going to set up, having Arteta know all of his tricks, considering he spent a considerable amount of time under him. How was Arteta going to approach this? I do feel he had a very strong game plan because it did work at the start. Whether Pep would have been able to react to it at half-time is a different story, but we'll never know, as the game did change within the first few minutes immediately. And unfortunately, Arsenal had lost 2 tactical substitutions due to injury early in the first half. That's been the tactical insight for today. My name is Yash Mahatma. Make sure to like and subscribe to the channel, and leave your comments below. What did you make of the performance? What things did you notice in the game? Make sure you turn on post notifications as well, and check us out on Instagram. We've got a new news video up there today as well, with lots of other content that you guys will enjoy. I'll see you guys soon. Come on, you Gunners.